Good morning. Welcome to the Sunday weekend edition of the Daf Yomi. We're back on schedule. Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by Shmuley and Miriam Fuchs, Lili Nishmas, Miriam's father, Henoch ben Yaakov Akoin, Zichron Bracha, whose yortzeit is on the 7th of Kislev. We are at a brand new Mishnah in the middle of Samach Daled Amud Beis. We're going to talk about our Ola Sa'of. So, first of all, Pasuk, the Psukim that tell us about how the Ola is done, right? It appears in the section of Ola in Sefer Vayikra. The whole Psukim read, "V'min ha'of Ola karban Ola Hashem." If his sacrifice is going to be an Ola, so then "V'kriv min ha'torim o min ha'bnei Yonah es karbano." You can bring pigeons and doves. Those are your choices: pigeons and doves. Older pigeons, younger doves. Right? Older pigeons, they mate for life.
You mean
they have characteristics.
The senior citizen of all pigeons?
The older of them. And then young doves, right, they have extremely close families and care for their young. So the younger doves, I can't remember where I had heard that. I had heard that from a Shiur, Daf Yomi Shiur, and I cannot remember where he had quoted it from, but from Rabbi Rosner's Daf Yomi Shiur had commented on that, and that therefore these are the animals that, every little detail in korbanos, every animal, every way that we do things, everything has lessons and things. So these two birds, and it says vehikruva kohen mizbeach. The kohen brings it to the mizbeach. Umalakas rosho and does malika to its head. Viktir mizbecha, and he burns it on the mizbeach. V'nimtza damal kir mizbeach, and he squeezes its blood onto the wall of the mizbeach. Ve'isir is mur aso benotzasa. He removes its mur'ah, the crop, right, which is going to be here, the zepek, which I guess in Hebrew, right, with its feathers, v'hishlichosa eitzal mizbeach kedma, and he throws it near the mizbeach on the east side, al makom hadeshen, to the place where the ashes were burned. V'shisa oso beknafav v'lo yavdil, and he is not supposed to separate. He's v'hiktir oso hakohenim mizbecha, and he's going to burn it on the mizbeach al ha'etzim ha'shalish, on the fire, on the wood which is on the fire. Olahu, it is a korban ola isha reach nichach l'Hashem. Burn to that. That's the psukim. So we're going to learn. We learn from there. We've got malika, right? You got to do malika. Number 2, you're going to have to burn the head, right? Number 3, we're going to squeeze the blood out, and number 4, the burning of the body. So those are our 4 stages of our korban ola. Ola sa'of ketzad nasis. How do we do a korban ola? Ola la kevesh. You go up on the ramp. Upana l'sovev, and then you make a right turn and go off the side ramp. Going off to the side ramp, okay? And go on to the ledge. Bolo l'keren dromis izrachas. You're going to arrive at the southeast corner, right over there, the southeast corner, where the arrow is pointed, right? Conveniently. Haya molek es roshamimu arpa. You would do malika, puncturing the bird in the back of the neck, right, from the behind, right, as we had said yesterday, where the shedra, that's the spine, right, it's going to puncture.
That's where the weakness is. That's where the blind point is.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know where the weakness in a bird is. The birds are weak. Yeah. True. So, yes, so that's what you're going to do. Umavdil, and this circumstance, not like last, we are going to sever both of the simanim, both the trachea and the esophagus. The two of, here, this is this picture has got the 2 pipes next to each other and indicates that we're going to sever all the way through. And then, umitza, we're going to squeeze the blood, estama al kir mizbeach, onto the wall of mizbeach. Natal es harosh. Okay, so now you're going to separate the head from the body, and you're going to take the head, vehikif base melikaso la mizbeach, and you're going to take the side of it where the malika was done, meaning the open wound area, and you're gonna squeeze the blood from that area in against the wall of the mizbeach. Sfago b'melach. Then you're going to bring it up onto the mizbeach, and you're going to soak it in salt. You're going to immerse it in salt. V'zarko al gabe ha'ishim, and then you're going to throw it onto the fire, into the fire of the mizbeach. Bolo leguf, then you go back down the ramp, back to where you were. You go to where you left the body. Ve'sir es hamur'ah ves hanotza, and you're going to take out the zepek, the crop, and the feathers that are around it, which we're going to see. This is I guess that area which is where the arrow is pointed to, right? That's where you're going to go in, and you're going to grab that. And also the intestines which are going to go out with it. And that's what you're going to throw to the burn, to where we had those coals that we had talked about yesterday. Shisa, then you are going to take the rest of the body and you're going to rip it open. You're going to rip it open with your hands. Velo hivdil, but you're not going to separate it, right? So you're going to open it along the spine so that it's opened from behind. And if you've ever done that to a chicken, right? That's basically when you're opening and making your chicken. So you're going to do that, but you're not supposed to rip the bird in half. But if you do accidentally, right, it's gentle meat, kosher, then it is still kosher. Sof go b'malach, then you put the salt onto that. V'zor kol gabayishim, and you put that onto the fire as well. Nobody gets to eat any of the olah, right? Only the korban chatos. And the korban chatos is done whole. We don't open it up at all. Lo hisir hamor avelo hanotza es bnei ma'ayim hayotzim imam. Let's say, now we're going to see which is the parts that are critical, which are not. Let's say you didn't take the olas and the olas oaf. You didn't take out the crop, and you didn't take out the feathers and the intestines that come out with them. Lo sfago b'melch. You didn't put salt on it. Kol sheshina ba me'achar shemitza as damak shera. As long as you make any of these changes, once you've already done the squeezing of the blood on the mizbeach, it's kosher, right? Once the blood is applied, that is the end of the required services. Hivdil bechatos. Let's say you make a mistake, and this is going to be much of the conversation that we have. Let's say you make a mistake and you separate the head, or at least cut both of the simanim by a chatos, which we said by the chatos you're only supposed to do one. Lo hivdil ba'olah. You don't do that by the olah. You only sever one and not two. By the olah, puzzle. That invalidates the korban, right? You have to make sure if you're doing an olah, you do the malika differently than you do the malika by achatos. Mitza as dam harosh, if you squeezed the blood from the head, velo mitza dam haguf, but not from the body, psula, that is also possible. The blood has to be squeezed from the body as well. Mitza dam haguf, velo mitza dam harosh, if, however, if you squeeze from the body but not from the head, kshera, that is okay. The main squeezing is going to be from the body. Chatas ha'of shemalka shelo lishma. Now, let's say you had a chatas ha'of, you had a bird chatos, and you did it lo lishma. So we remember what the rules of chatos were when we were talking about animals earlier in the Masechta, at the beginning of the Masechta. We talked about doing a chatos lo lishma was going to invalidate the offering. Similar here. Let's say you do the malika with not lishma. Mitza dama shelo lishma. You do the mitza, you do squeezing of the blood, not for the sake of the chatos. Or you do it lishma v'shelo lishma. Right, we starting doing it lishma, but then we change our mind in the middle. Or the other way around, shelo lishma v'lishma. We talked about partial intent during avoda. We had a whole conversation about that. All of those circumstances are psula. They're going to invalidate the korban, right? Even if it's not pigul intent, just because it's a chatos, any shelo lishma, if I have in mind, I'm going to make this into an olah while I'm doing the chatos, so that is going to invalidate my korban chatos. However, olas ha'of, when it comes to the bird, it's kshera. It's kosher. Because we said by an olah, if you change it not to do the right korban, we said it's still kosher, except it just doesn't count for its owner. So that's going to be consistent with what we learned by animals. Echad ha'of, echad chatas ha'of, ve'echad olas ha'of, both in the circumstance of the bird offerings of the chatos and the bird offering of the olah, shemalkan v'shemitza as daman lechol davar shedarko lechol. You have in mind, this is the pigul rules. When I do the korban, I do the malika for these birds, or I do the squeezing of the blood, and I'm thinking that the item that I'm going to consume, meaning by the chatos, the meat of the bird, and or lahaktir davar shedarko lahaktir, or like the olah, where I'm going to burn the whole thing, chutz lemekomo, I'm going to do it outside of the Beis HaMikdash, as we had learned, puzzle. That's going to invalidate the offering, but ain't bo kares. There's no kares for that because that is not pigul. Chutz lezmano, if you have in mind that you're going to do it outside of the proper time, so then that's pigul, as we had said. V'chayav and alav kares, and you could be chayav kares for consuming that or burning that. Ubilvad sheyakriv hamatir k'mitzvaso, as long as the rest of the korban, as we've discussed in the past, is done properly. I'm just going to grab a tissue before we continue on in this Mishnah. What's nice about this Mishnah is that it's not very shocking, right? A lot of the good repeat stuff that nothing is completely out of the ordinary.
That's the shocking part of it.
The shocking part is not shocking. Okay, Kate said, Karav Hamatir Kamitzvaso. Okay, so we said that it has to be done properly. So, what's the definition of doing it properly? So, Malak Bishtika Umitza Dam Chutz Lizmano. Let's say you do the Malika and you don't say anything wrong. You don't do anything wrong. And the squeezing of the blood you have in mind for Pigel, Chutz Lizmano. You can do it outside the right time. O shemalak chutz lizmano umitza hadam b'shtika. Or you do the reverse. You do the malika with the intent that it should be outside the proper time, and you do the mitzah properly. O shemalak umitza hadam chutz lizmano. Or you do the malika and the mitzah with the wrong intent for pigol. Zeu shekarav hamatir mitzvah. So that's what we're talking about. That makes it pigol, right? The intent ruins it, but you haven't done anything else to the korban to make it possible. What's the example of not bringing it properly? Let's say you do malika and you have in mind that you're going to eat it outside the proper place, and then you do the squeezing of the blood with the intent outside the proper time. Since you thought outside the proper place, that creates a psul that's not kares. If you then go back and you try to make it pigel, you can't because it's already possible for another reason. Or the reverse. I do the malika with pigel intent, but then instead of doing the mitzvah quietly, this time I do the mitzvah with intent that I'm going to do it outside the proper place. Again, puzzle, therefore there's no pigel. Or if I do malika, of course, and mitzvah with the intent outside the proper place, that's going to be a psul for sure. And also, what about chatas ha'of malku shelo lishma? Let's say it's a bird offering, and you do the malika not for the intent of a chatos. As we said, that's also going to invalidate your offering. Since your offering is invalidated, there's no pigol there. Umita dam chutz lizmano, and therefore, even if you do the squeezing of the blood outside of its proper time, with the intent of outside its proper time, that's also not going to be pigol. O shemalak chutz lizmano, or you do the malika thinking that it's going to be outside its proper time. Umita damo shelo lishma, but I think that this mitzvah, this squeezing of the blood, is not for a korban chatos, to be for a korban ola. O shemalak umitza adam shelo lishma, or of course, if you do the malika and the mitzvah with not the right intent for the right korban for a korban chatos, that's going to invalidate it. Zeu shelo karav hamatir k'mitzvah. So that's what we mean that the korban was made possible through a different wrong intent, and therefore that's not going to create pigol. Those are the circumstances that don't create pigol. Again, nothing outrageously shocking, runs parallel to what we have said in the past. Now, let's say lecho kazayas bachutz, kazayas lemachar. Let's say you're going to do half. You're going to do these intents before. We've had the same thing by the animal, right? Let's say you're going to eat. You say, I'm going to eat a kazayas of this outside of the Beis Hamikdash and a kazayas of this tomorrow. Right? So now you've got both of those intents. Kazayas lemachar, kazayas bachutz, or you do it the reverse. You say, I'm going to eat it tomorrow, and then I'm going to eat another one outside. Kachatzi zayis bachutz, kachatzi zayis lemachar. I'm going to have half a olive outside and half of an olive's portion tomorrow. Kachatzi zayis lemachar, kachatzi zayis bachutz. Or he does it the reverse, and he says, half is going to be tomorrow and half will be outside. Those are all pasul vein bokares. Those are pasul, right? Because you having intent both for pigol and for outside the right place. But even as we had described, since pigol and chutz l'mekomo are both in the same pasuk, half a kazayis of this and half a kazayis of this is going to combine together to create a psul of the korban, but it's not going to create pigol. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda said, Zeh haklal, here's our rule. He's going to disagree with what we've been saying before, and he's going to follow what he has said in the past. And we've even quoted this Mishnah in the past to explain Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, that if the first intent you have is a pigol intent, and then afterwards, right, you have a intent for outside the proper place, so then it is pigol v'chayav alav kares, then it becomes pigol. He holds, it goes by whatever you did first. If you made it pigol first, and then you tried to make it pasul with some other intent, the pigol still stands, right? But in machshavas hamakom kadmal machshavas hazman, if the first thing you did was make it pasul, and then you go back and try to make it pigol, So then it's pasul ve'imbo kares. Then the pasul happens. It's whatever you thought first. We call it the das rishon, the first intent, and that's what matters. But the chachamim disagree. The chachamim they disagree. Zev is pasul either in both of those circumstances, as the Mishnah had said. It does not make a difference. Pasul ve'imbo kares. Since you have a invalidating intent other than pigul, it becomes pasul, and there's no kares there. Okay, last little bit to know. Lecho kachatzi zayis ulahaktir kachatzi zayis. Let's say you have in mind you're going to eat half an olive and you're going to burn half an olive. Kosher, the korban is kosher. Now it's interesting because you don't have, unlike the animal where some of it's eaten and some of it's burnt, by the korban of a bird, no korban. It's either all burnt or all eaten. We never have a korban that's half and half. So therefore, this is going to be kosher. Because even still, you don't have a combination of eating and burning. Even when it came to animals, we had said that the burning and the eating don't combine unless we had used an actual language of eating when we talked about the mizbeach. Meaning, if I had said, I'm going to eat half kazayas and the mizbeach is going to eat half kazayas, then we said maybe that can combine. But burn half and eat half, that is language that does not combine. And similar here, of course, where you don't even ever have a korban that has both anyway, it for sure does not combine. But that's for the sake of completion, right? It's similar to the Mishnah we had on what we had said on Chaf Tes Amud Beis. Okay, now into the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan. Brisa, we learned in a Brisa. V'hikrivo, the pasuk in beginning of Vayikra says V'hikrivo hakohen el mizbeach umalak es rosho, that you're going to bring this bird to the mizbeach. You're going to do malika of its head, v'iktir mizbecha, and you're going to burn it on the mizbeach. V'nimta damo kir mizbeach, and then you are going to squeeze the blood onto the wall of the mizbeach. So here's the rules of the Ola. Lafi. Lomar, what is the reason why it says we're going to go through each word in the pasuk, try to understand what each word means. V'hikrivo, lefisha nemar, because the pasuk says v'hikriv min atorim o min b'nei hayona. You're supposed to bring either a pigeon or a young dove. Right now, the pigeons, we said, are older than a year, and the pigeons are younger. I mean, the doves are younger. Yachol hamisnadev of lov yivchos shnei predin. You might have thought, so since it says you're supposed to bring in the plural, birds, doves, or pigeons, I might think there's no such thing as an individual. I can't make a pledge of an individual korban ola because they have to be in pairs. So normally they are. Normally it's a pair of birds that are brought. However, this pasuk is telling me the hikrivo, singular, means that if a person decides he wants to make a pledge to bring a single bird as an ola, he can. Okay, then we get to El HaMizbeach, to the Mizbeach. Matama Lomar, what is it? Why does it say V'krivo HaKohen? Matama Lomar HaKohen, why does it say the Kohen? Likboa lo Kohen, right? That's to tell me you need a Kohen. Kohen has to do the Malika. Even though we had said that Shechita by a non-Kohen is acceptable, Malika must be done by a Kohen.
Malika is when you put your thumb into the throat, right?
Right, well, not the throat, but for the back of the neck, right? We're going from the back. Valo dinhu. Isn't it a kal v'chomer otherwise? Ma benson. When it comes to animals, shekava lo tzafon, it's stricter. We were told that you've got to do it in the north side of the Azara. Lo kava lo kohen. Nevertheless, you don't need a kohen to do it. So, of shelo kava lo tzafon. A bird, where it doesn't say that it has to be done in the north, enodin shelo yikba lo kohen. For sure, you don't need a kohen, right? Tam and Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, ha-kohen likbo lo kohen. Therefore the pasuk tells us very clearly, by the bird you need a kohen. Can't be done by a non-kohen.
Even if it's not in the north?
Even if it's not in the north, right? So you don't need north, but you do need a kohen. Yachol yimlakenu b'sakin, you might think you can use a knife to do malika, right? V'dinu, there's a logic, there's a kal v'chomer there. Because ma'im shchita shelo kava la kohen, if when it comes to shchita, you don't need a kohen, kava lakli, you definitely need a knife. Malika shekava lakohen, malika, which is a stricter service, it needs a kohen. Enodin shekava lakli, for sure it should need a knife. Tamalon, for the pasuk says, ha kohen umalak, right? The kohen is going to do the malika, which means Rabbi Akiva says, which means the kohen ba'atzmo, means the kohen himself has to do it, not with the utensil. So he says, how could, if the pasuk says, right, v'krivo hakohen al mizbeach malak, that he's going to bring it close to the mizbeach and do malika, How could you possibly think a Yisrael doesn't ever go close to the Mizbeach? Yisrael can't go that far into the Azara. A non-Kohen can't go close to the Mizbeach. He can't go that far in. So Ella mat Talmud lomar HaKohen. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva says, why does this Torah specify? Once it's saying that you're supposed to bring it to the Mizbeach, of course it's a Kohen. Why does the pasuk have to specify Kohen? Shetei Malika ba'atzmo shel Kohen, in order to tell us that the Malika has to be done with the body of the Kohen itself, right? No knife involved. That's how Rabbi Akiva learns it. Yachol gimlekena bein milmala bein milmata. I might think that it doesn't matter where I do Malika. I have above the ledge, below the ledge. Doesn't make a difference. So therefore it says, Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, umalak vehiktir. You do Malika, and then you do Haktara, you do the burning. Mahaktara barosh mizbeach, burning is on top of the mizbeach because that's where the fire is. Af malika barosh mizbeach, so too the malika has to be done on the upper half of the mizbeach. Okay, then we say malak, it's malika, which means, tells us, mimul oref, it goes from the back of the neck. Ata omer mimul oref, o enu ela minat savar. You just said that it's from the back of the neck. How do you know that malika isn't from the throat, like Yehuda suggested? V'dinu, there's a kavachomer after all. Nemar kan umalak, it says here that you're supposed to do malika v'nemar lahalan, and it says by the chatas ha'of, by the bird chatas, it says umalak, it has to be done with malika. Ma lahalan mimul oref, just like by the bird of the chatas, it has to be from behind, because it says, right in the pasuk, by the chatas, it says malak es rosho mimul arpo. You're supposed to do malika from the back of the neck. So we know what malika is, so afkan mimul oref. So too, when it says here by the Ola of the bird, it's also malika, same way, from the back. Okay, well, now that you've told me what the definition of malika is, let's copy all the rules from chatos. Malika by a chatos, you're supposed to sever one of the simonim, one, either the trachea or the esophagus, but not both, right? You're molik ve'eno mavdil, you don't separate the head, and you don't separate the two simonim. Afkan molik ve'eno mavdil, so too by the bird offering of the ola, you should do malika without severing both. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, umalak vehiktir. The pasuk is saying, mahaktara harosh la'atzmo, ve'guf la'atzmo, just like you're supposed to burn, right? It says in the psukim, you're going to burn the head on the mizbeach, and then later it says you burn the body on the mizbeach, which means the head and the body have to be separate. Af malika, harosh la'atzmo, ve'guf la'atzmo. So too, when you do malika, that's supposed to do a complete severing, which severs the head from the body, which tells us the malika is slightly different by an ola than it is by a chatos. Okay, uminayin shak toras harosh be'atzmo ve'haguf be'atzmo. Okay, well, how do I know that? How do I know that when I'm burning the bird on the mizbeach, that it says the Mishnah described, I remove the head, go up the ramp, dip it in salt, burn it, then go back down the ramp, then get the body of the bird, and then bring that up the ramp and then burn that. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, the whole pasuk says, "V'shisa oso b'chnafa v'lo yavdil." You're supposed to open up the bird by its wings, meaning from the back, but not separate the bird completely. V'iktiroso, and then burn it on the mizbeach. Hariak toras haguf amura. That's talking about burning the body. Ha mani mekayim. Then how do I explain the earlier part of the pasuk, which says v'iktir hamizbecha? You're going to separate. You're going to do malika on the head and then burn it on the mizbeach. Baktaras harosha kasev medaber. That's burning the head. So therefore, I've got two burnings in the psukim. One's telling me to burn the head. What's telling me to burn the body? Therefore, the head and the body are separated, and therefore malika for the ola also separates the head from the body. Then the pasuk says, "V'nimtza damo." We're going to squeeze the blood, right? So that means that you would presume that you have to do kulo, right? The entire service, I guess, is the malika. Right? You don't need to do any sprinkling like we had by the chatas. You do some sprinkling first, and then you do mitzah. All you do is you squeeze all the blood out. That's what you're supposed to do. Then it says al kir hamizbeach. You have to do it on the wall of the mizbeach, which means v'lo al kir kevesh, v'lo al kir heichal. You can't do it on the ramp. You can't do it on the wall of the Beis Hamikdash. Ve'ezeh zeh. Which wall are we talking about? Zekir ha'elyon. It's going to be the upper wall, which we had discussed yesterday by the chatas. We use the lower wall. Right? This upper section of the mizbeach, up on the top section, not the lower section. Right? How do you know it's the upper wall? Maybe it means the lower wall. V'didnu, because there's a logic after all. If you take a look at animal sacrifices, the chatos of an animal sacrifice has its blood application up by the corners of the mizbeach, whereas the ola, you're on the ground and you're throwing the blood on the two corners, which are four, right? Oaf, when it comes to a bird, therefore, shechataso lemato, where we learned already that we know that you're going to apply the blood below the line, because we know that the blood has to be placed in the same location as you're going to squeeze the blood, which goes to the base. Eino din she'ola so lemata. For sure, the ola should be on the bottom, right? If the ola, an animal, is on the bottom, then for sure, bird ola should be on the bottom. Talmud Lomar, therefore, the pasuk says, umalak vehiktir. You are going to do malika, and then you're going to burn it. Right, just as we said before, by the chatos, you do malika, and then you're going to do mitzah into the base. Now it says you do malika, and then you burn it. V'nimtza damo, which means, and then you're going to squeeze the blood. V'chitala datoch le'achar shehiktir chozer u'mematzeh. The pasuk doesn't make sense, because the pasuk says you do malika, then you burn it, then you squeeze the blood. You can't squeeze the blood after it's already burnt. Makes no sense. Ella lomar lecha. Rather, this is telling you mahaktara barosh hamizbeach. Just like the burning is going to be on the top of the mizbeach, av mitzui barosh hamizbeach. So too, the squeezing of the blood is going to be on the upper part of the mizbeach. It's telling you where, right? You're going to do this mitzvah where you are going to eventually burn it. So therefore, the ola, the mitzvah of the blood, is above. So ha ketzad. So the Mishnah, this brisa summarizes and says, okay. So how does this whole thing work? Haya ola bekevesh. He goes up the ramp. Upono l'sovev. He makes a right turn on the small ramp and goes up to the ledge. Ubalo l'karen dromis mizrachis. He arrives at the southeast corner. Hayam molik. He does his malika. Es rosham mimular pa, from the back of the neck. Mavdil. And then he separates the head. Mematzeh midama al kira mizbeach. And then he squeezes from the blood onto the wall of mizbeach. Then, im asa lemata meraglov, this brisa adds on a point, that if you had squeezed the blood below your feet, afilu amma, even an amma kshera, that would still be kosher, because the chuta sikra is the bottom of this line. You've got this design on the mizbeach that is 1 amma tall, which means that the upper portion of the mizbeach is not just from the ledge and up, it's from the bottom of this design and up. So therefore, theoretically, not why would you do it? It doesn't make sense, but it would be kosher if you squeezed the blood in that on that design area. That would be above the chuta sikra. That would still be valid, right? So Reb Nechemia and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Rabbi Nechemia and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say kol atzma ein nases ela berosh hamizbeach. He says the entire, right? You're not supposed to do this under the. They disagree. You're not supposed to do this under the ledge. You've got to do the entire thing above, because since it says, right, the pasuk says that you're doing the malika and then you're going to burn it. So that means you have to do it above the ledge where you're going to eventually be burning the korban. So they don't agree. It's not a chuta sikra issue. It seems it's a ledge issue, according to them. My beinaihu. What is the difference between the two? Abaye v'Rava, Damri Tavaya, both Abaye and Rava explain Ose maracha al gabi sovev ika beinaihu. The question is, if you were to build a little fire on that ledge, it's on the mizbeach, you're burning it on the mizbeach, does that count? So that's the argument between the two.
Doesn't the fire have its own? Doesn't the Zevachim have its own fire? If you build another fire,
yeah. So why would you? It's a good point. Why would you? But could you? Right? If you were so inclined, let's say you did. Could you? Okay. So that's the point. So according to the opinions that say, well, you can't use the space down here. That's because all the fire is way up here. So therefore, you're way too far away from the fire. But if you hold that you can build a fire on the side, because that's still part of the mizbeach, you're only 1 amma away from the fire, that would be acceptable.
Was there a fire on the top right corner, or only on the...
There is a fire on the top right corner here. There is, but that isn't the fire that they were using. They were using this middle one, right. This was where I guess they got all their coals from. They heated up the wood and burned it into coals.
Did they have a fire in the back of it as well? Or
they had a fire back here. That's for the tummy. We really spoke mainly about this one so far. And we spoke about this one so far. These two we didn't have much conversation about yet.
One corner that did not have a fire.
That's correct.
That's what I was asking.
Yes, we've got one corner fireless.
You know what the reason for that was?
To cool off. The answer is because you only need to put fires where you need the fire. The fires all had their individual purposes. They just didn't do it for balance, right? Each fire was for a purpose, right? So we've learned the purposes of this fire, right? Because you had to burn the incense spoons from inside. You had to take coals and bring it inside. It had to be close to the opening of the Beis HaMikdash, right? This is the big fire where we're going to burn all the limbs, right? And here we're making the coals and things that we're going to take from here and keep the fire going, right? This is the Ner Tamid, right? The independent fire that we're just going to keep a fire burning on the Mizbeach constantly, right? So we'll discuss all of the other fires, but essentially we've really discussed the main one and this one so much so far. Okay, then he's burnt the head. Now comes the Mishnah said, Ba lo leguf, right? He's going to come to the body, and now when he comes to the body, he's going to remove these portions of the bird's internal organs in order to throw them away, right? Those don't get burned. Tana Rabban and our rabbis learned, Ve'isir es mur aso benot aso. The pasuk says you're going to take out its mur'ah and its feathers. Zu zepek. What is the mur aso? It's the zepek. That's this guy right here. I think in English it's the crop. I'm pretty sure that it's the crop. I wouldn't have known what a crop is anyway.
And he said that's where the food is broken down?
Yeah, the crop is for digestion in the birds, right? And some birds will swallow stones and pebbles in order to help aid in digestion, right? To crush the food. That is how the birds digest. Okay, so that's what's done in the zepek. It's for digestion.
It's like a muscular pouch in the neck that acts as a temporary storage and something's chamber for food before it moves to the stomach for digestion.
There you go.
Beautiful.
So there you are. You remove it. Yachol yakdir bisakin. You might think that you're supposed to, right? You've done your malik already because that came from the back. You might think now I can take a knife and cut this out. V'yitlenu and take it out. Tamalomar. Therefore it says bin notza sa. You take it with the feathers. Notaras notza ima. Right? You're going to take the skin of the bird together with it. Okay? So, therefore, you're just going to pull the whole thing out by hand. Abba Yossi ben Chanan Omer, notla v'notel kurkavna ima. So, Abba Yossi ben Chanan says that the morah is the zepek, but the notza, that notza doesn't mean you take the feathers. It means you take the kurkivana. The kurkivana is down here. That's the gizzard. That's got more digested food in there. Right? And that gizzard gets ripped out together with it. Okay? And the word notza just means disgusting. Why? Because by the time the food gets to the gizzard, it's partially digested, and that's where it's gross. So you pull that out. Rabbi Yishmael Tana, in the Yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, they had taught ben notzasa with its notzasa, ben notza shelo, that you're supposed to take not together with any skin. You're supposed to take out just the crop and the gizzard. How are you going to do that? Right? Because then normally if I'm going to rip it out, I'm going to take some skin out with it. So what do? Kodra bisakin. You're supposed to cut open the bird with a knife, take a scalpel, open it up, and then kamin aruba, like you open up a little window there, right? And that's why he's got a little thing. You're going to cut out a little hole there, and you're going to take the organs out through that. Okay, so that's the machlokas, the different viewpoints on how that was done. Okay, then the Mishnah says, Shisa velo hivdil, you're going to open up the bird, but you're not going to separate it completely in half. Tana Rabban rabbis learned, Veshisa ein shisa, ela biyad. The word shisa, to open it up by its wings, the word shisa means by hand. You're not supposed to, again, use a knife to cut it open. V'chein hu omer, as the pasuk says, in Shoftim, vayishas ehub kashesa hagedi, that Shimshon, he ripped open, what was it, the lion? I think that he was opening up there. He ripped that open with his bare hands. The word that means to rip something open with your bare hands is shesa, and that's the language here. So the Kohen is supposed to open up the bird with his hands. Okay, now Mishnah says, "Velo heisir es hamur a." You don't take out if you didn't take out the crop, right? So then it's still or you separated the bird head by a chatos, but you didn't do it with the ola. It's going to be puzzle. So that means that the malika by the ola and the malika of the chatos are essentially different. There's going to be a few ways that it's different. At this point, we've discussed the main difference being severing the head completely, or also severing the two. We said, what is it, the word vessels he said, right? The two vessels.
Right, yeah,
right?
Exactly.
The esophagus and the trachea. Masnisen delo Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. This Mishnah, right, is not like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, because then Brisa says, Titania winner Brisa, Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says, Shamati shemavdilim bechatas haof. It is okay if you separate by the chatasof, he says. The Mishnah says not okay, because the pasuk says lo yavdil by the chatas. You're not supposed to separate it. Says Rabbi Elazar, we're going to have to understand how he understands the pasuk. If the pasuk says you shall not separate it, sounds like there's a losase, right? The Rambam and others quote that's a losase. If you separate the head of the bird, you have done an avera of losase lo yavdil. You shall not separate. So Rabbi Elazar says, no, I heard it's okay if you do it. So that's my beinahu. So what's the difference of viewpoint between our Mishnah and this brisa Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon? Why would one say that you can separate the head by a chatas and one say that you can't? So Amar Rav Chisda, so Rav Chisda, he gives the first attempt. He says, Mitzui chatas ha'of ma'akev ikabeinahu. The question is that when it came to the bird offering of a korban chatas, we knew there were two steps to the blood. We had to sprinkle the blood and we had to squeeze the blood out. When you sprinkle the blood, that was a required thing. When you squeeze the blood, that's the question. Tanakama savar mitzui chatas ha'of ma'akev. The Tanakama in our Mishnah says that you have to squeeze the blood out. It's critical to the chatas service. Therefore, if you don't do mitzvah, if you don't squeeze the blood, if all you did was sprinkle it, and you didn't squeeze it out by a chatos, your korban would not be valid. V'kevan demitzui dam ka'avid maisa ola. So now what he's doing is he has severed the head, and now he's squeezing the blood out. Well, if he's doing a chatos, now he's basically turned his chatos into an ola. That's going to ruin it. That's going to ruin the korban because we said you can't do a malika of an ola when you're doing your chatos. So now you're imitating all the services. You've done your malika with 2 simanim, then you squeeze the blood out. So now you're imitating an ola.
Could it be like a mockery?
Not a mockery because you're not making fun of it, but you are doing the wrong service, right? And so therefore that's going to invalidate it. Right, because ka'avin masa ola bechatas oaf. You're doing an ola malika by a bird, by a chatas offering. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon savar, but Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says mitzui chatas ha'of lo makev. You don't have to do mitzui of the chatas oaf. So therefore, if you severed both of the vessels, so just don't do mitzvah. It's a chatos, it's still valid. And if it was an ola, it wouldn't be valid, right? Because ola requires the mitzvah. So therefore, if you don't do it, right, mechatech basar biyamahu, all you did was just cut a little bit too much. But you didn't do the rest of the malika of an ola because you didn't ever do the mitzvah, you never did the squeezing, and you'd be okay. As long as you make your malika different, you're not going to be ruining it. So therefore, if you hold that the mitzvah is required by a chatas, you've got no choice. You got to go through with it, and now you've turned your chatas into an ola. But if you don't need to do the mitzvah, then just don't, and then you're back to a chatas again. Rava says, I'll tell you the difference. Shehia b'simin sheni b'olas ha'of ma'akev, right? Ikabeinahu. The difference is by an ola. When you do shchita of an animal, right, and you're using the knife, right, and you're sliding the knife on the front of the neck of the animal. And you see that's where the veshus and the kana and the veshus are in the front. So normally you do shchita up in the front area. You're not supposed to have a time space in between the severing of the two. You're supposed to do them both pretty quick, right? Back and forth, you do a quick cut, and that's how it's supposed to be.
Like smoothness.
Correct. If you wait in between, then the animal is not kosher. That's not a kosher shchita. So the question is, when you're doing a malika for an ola, if you wait in between, does that invalidate the malika or not? That's the question. Tanakama savar, because why? Because when you're doing malika on a chatas, and this I'm not 100% sure of exactly how this is operating, so I will say it how I'm reading it, but if you ask me the details of it, I'm not 100% sure anatomically.
Can you give me a little more detail?
I'm working on it. Here we go. What happens is that when I'm doing malika on the chatos, okay, I stick my nail in and I sever one of the vessels, right? Mm-hmm. Then I have to go around and cut the meat of the neck of the bird and go around to the front to cut. And then if I cut the second one, there's a break in between. I didn't go straight through and cut. Rather, I've cut, and in doing the rest of the malika of the chatos, cutting through the rest of the neck of the bird, I have now waited in between the first vessel and the second vessel.
I would say that should be invalid.
So now, if you say, so Tanakama Savar, Shehia Besiman Sheni Ba'olas Of Lo Ma'akev, so according to the Tanakama, he says, you don't have to worry about waiting. It doesn't matter. Which means that when you did your malika on your chatos, and you went around and you cut the second vessel, you did a proper ola malika, which would invalidate your chatos. Right? V'afagav d'shehia ka'avid ma'isa ola b'chatos. So even though you did a delay with the chatos, even though you delayed because you were cutting through the meat of the neck before you got to the second of the pipes, nevertheless, that's still a valid ola malika, which means you just made your chatos into an ola. That would be bad. However, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Savar, Rabbi Shimon says, Ma'akiv, you can't delay. If in the ola, slicing both the trachea and the esophagus is critical, and when you do the malika of an ola, you got to go straight through, sever both the trachea and the esophagus, and then cut the rest of the flesh around the neck. The kaven de shehia, once you did the chatos and you only did one of them, and then you went around the neck and then accidentally severed from the front, that's not, because you've already done a delay, that's not a malika of an ola anyway, because you're not doing it in the proper same way, and therefore that's why it doesn't invalidate your chatos. That's version 2. Abayi says, I'll tell you a third distinction between the malikas, and that is rov basar me'akev. The question is, do you need to cut through all the rest of that meat in the neck of the chatos? Or if you went straight through, let's say you went straight through and you got both of those vessels, would that be a kosher chatos severing, or do you have to go around in order to sever one and then go around in order for it to be a kosher for chatos? Now, let's explain this before we get back into it. This is beplugta de Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. This is dependent on the argument between Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Chad amar shehia besiman sheni ba'olas of ma'akev ikabeinahu. One says, right, whether you can delay between doing the second siman, as we had suggested, that was the distinction. V'chad amar, and one says rov basar ma'akev ikabeinahu. Then one says like Abaye, who says the difference is whether you have to cut this flesh. Miklau, right? That would seem to imply that we're going to say whether there's an argument whether this cutting this meat is necessary or not. Deba'inan rov basar batchila. That lichatchila, everyone would agree you're supposed to cut most of that meat. Right? Meaning, the way that you do the malika by a chatos is you cut into the animal with your thumb, sever one of the vessels, and then cut the meat all around the neck. So the answer is, that is true. Vehatanya, we learned in a brisa. Ketzad molkin chatos of, what is the procedure for doing malika by a bird, by the chatos bird? Chotech shedra, you go in, you sever the spinal cord from the back, umaf rekas, below brov basar, and then you're going to puncture, right? You're going to puncture without going through the meat. Ad shemagia levesht olakana, until you get to either the trachea or the esophagus. Higia leveshes olakana, when you get to one or the other and you only sever one of them. Chotech siman echad, you're only going to sever one of them. I presume this takes a lot of precision because. Yeah. Bird's neck is this thin, right? You're going to do one of them and not the other. O rubo, or at least the majority of one of the vessels. Rov basar imo, then you got to go and cut most of the meat of the neck. Now, uba ola, but when you do the ola, you go in straight from the back and you go all the way through until you do shnayim, you cut through both the trachea and the esophagus. O rov shnayim, or at least two of them. So now, the thing is like this. The question is, does that going around to the meat, is that required or not? Because that will make a distinction in how you're doing your malika by a chatas versus an oaf. So amruha kame de Rabbi Yirmiyah. So they said these words of Rav Chisda and Rava and Abaye, that they had this argument. So basic bottom line is, if it was required for you to go around the neck, so then by doing so, you're automatically going to have a circumstance where you are going to not be doing your malika for this chatas like an ola, because you're only going to be cutting one of them and then going around, cut the other, and even if you cut the other one, there's a delay in between. And by an ola, you're supposed to cut straight through before you cut the meat. So therefore, there's a distinction, and whether you need to cut that meat is the point of contention. So therefore, if you don't need to cut that all the way through, so then you can have a malika like an ola by a chatos, and that would invalidate it. But otherwise, if it's required, you can't, because there's several differences. So they taught all of these different Rav Chisda, Rava, and Abaye's three different versions of what the distinction of why one would hold that you can sever the head, and one says you can't sever the head. In front of Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, he said, Lo shmiya luhu had Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Eliyakim, Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. Didn't anybody hear of what Rabbi Shimon ben Eliyakim said in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Pedas, who said in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua? That answers the question. Omer Haya Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon would say, Shamati bechatas ha'of shemavdilin, right? That there's no prohibition. I heard that you're allowed to, by a korban chatos, by the oaf chatos, by a bird chatos, that you're allowed to sever the head. So if that's the case, my lo yavdil, why does the pasuk say you're not allowed to separate? Meaning, ein tzarich lahavdil. You don't have to separate. You can, it's not the end of the world. Okay? So therefore, it's not a psul. So now, okay, so now let's go through this. This idea that when it says don't do something, it means, it's okay if you do. Where do we get such a thing from? Amarli Rav Acha Brei de Rav Rav Ashi. El Me'ata, if that's true, take a look at other psukim. Pasuk says gabe bor, by a pit. You dig a pit in the middle of the street. You're not supposed to dig a pit in the middle of the street. It causes damages. Tichsiv, the pasuk says, v'chi yiftach, the whole pasuk is v'chi yiftach ish bor. If a person opens up a pit in the middle of the street, okichre ish bor, or he uncovers a pit, v'lo yichasenu, and he doesn't cover it, and somebody's ox or donkey falls in, you got to pay. So v'lo yichasenu, if he doesn't cover it, means hachanami dein tzarich lechasos, means if he didn't close it, then he's liable, but he doesn't have to close it. So, is that what it means? So, hachi hashta. There, what are you talking about? Hasam came in the chsiv, ba'alabor yishom. It says that if he doesn't close it, he's got to pay. So, it's very clear. Ilavehu derami lechsuya means that he's got to cover it. That's how we know he's got to cover. Normally, you're right. Okay, the pasuk could mean maybe you do, maybe you don't. It's clear you've got to cover it, because if you don't cover it, you got to pay. Avahacha, but here, michti, what does it say here? Look, let's take a look what the pasuk says. Ksiv vehikrivo, that you should bring close to the mizbeach. Chila kakos ben chatos ha'of la'olas ha'of. The pasuk is making a distinction between a chatos and an ola of birds. It says, so therefore, lo yavdil lamali, right? So why does it say lo yavdil, right? The answer is, shma mina ein tzarich lahavdil. It says the distinction between the two is, you don't have to. You don't have to separate it. Okay, so therefore if you do, you could, but you don't have to. Okay, the last little bit here is mitza dam haguf. You squeeze the blood from the body, right? You don't, and you didn't squeeze it from the head, it's kosher. So Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis learned, because the pasuk says ola hu, it is an ola. Ola afal pisha mitza dam haguf lo mitza dam harosh. That means the pasuk says it is an ola, means that even if you didn't do the blood squeezing from the head, it is still an ola. All you got to do is the squeezing of the blood from the body. That's the critical part. Yachol mitzah dam harosh v'mitzah dam haguf. You might think, okay, maybe if I did the squeezing of the blood from the head, but not from the body, that would also likewise be acceptable. Talmud Lomar, it says who. Therefore, the pasuk says who. That this last mitzvah that's talking about pasuk in Yud Zayin, right? That this is now that you've squeezed the blood from the body, it is an ola. It's that blood squeezing that's required. So my Talmuda, where's the logic? All the pasuk says is, once I've squeezed the blood, then the korban is acceptable. It doesn't tell me which squeezing, the head or the body. So Ravina says, now I know that it's only one squeezing that's required, not both. Ravina says, Mistabra derov damin beguf shchichi. It makes more sense because most of the blood is in the body, right? Not in the head. So therefore, where's the main squeezing? The main squeezing is the body. So all you got to do is squeeze from the body, not the head, and you are acceptable. Okay? Hadranach kodshei kodshim, hadranach kodshei kodshim, hadranach kodshei kodshim. And we've got a Mishnah. Okay? I don't know if we want to 2 minutes till do the Mishnah. Let's do it that way. At least we turn on to Samach Vav on the base.
Let's hope you guys get a minion.
Well, yeah, let's hope so.
Okay, we'll do this Mishnah quick. Okay. Chatas ha'of she'asel lemata. If you do a chatas, a bird offering below the red line on this beach, k'maisa chatas, but you do everything else just like a chatas, l'shem chatas kshera, it is kosher, right? Because that's the way you're supposed to. It's supposed to do it below the line, right? K'maisa chatas l'shem ola. But if you do a chatos, you do chatos actions, and you think that it's going to be an ola, right? Kamasa ola, or you do some of the actions of an ola l'shem chatos for the sake of a chatos, kamasa ola l'shem ola, or you do ola actions for the sake of an ola, so then psula, that's going to ruin the chatos, right? You can ruin the chatos if you do anything thinking it's the wrong thing, or any actions of an ola, as we described, we were talking about the malika of an ola by a chatos, that's going to invalidate the chatos. Also thinking about an ola while you're doing the chatas is also going to invalidate it. So all of those circumstances. Also lemala, let's say you do the chatas above the red line. Okay, you do it above the red line. Kemaisa kulon, and you do everything else, right? Any of these other things, like you did an ola l'shem chatas or any of those things, psula, it is possible. Olas ha'of, let's say now we're talking about the ola of a bird. She'asel hamal, if you do that above the red line, that's the proper thing to do. Kemas ola, you do it like an ola, l'shem ola, that's kosher, that's good. However, kemas ola, if you do it with all the actions of an ola, l'shem chatos, but you think this is going to be a chatos, it's still kosher. As we said, ubelvad shelo also about, it just doesn't count for its owner. Still okay if you had the wrong intent, because it's an ola, olas are like that. Now, however, k'maisa chatos, if you do a chatos action, l'shem ola, but you do it for the sake of an ola, k'maisa chatos l'shem chatos, or you do a chatos action for the sake of a chatos. Since you're doing an action of a chatos, psula, that's going to invalidate your ola. Also, lamata, if you do your ola below the red line, k'maisa kulan, and you do any of these other changes, then psula, that's going to invalidate it also, right? Got to be doing a chatas above, you got to do the ola above the red line, not below. Okay, we will discuss all of these details tomorrow. We continue on Samach Vav base. Today was Samach test, so we're
cooking.
Today
today was Ayin. Today was Ayin. Right. So we're
behind.
Four behind. We're on it.